Hey guys, tonight we saddle up not for a quick getaway or a gallop into battle, but for a surprisingly soothing ride across the endless steppes of the Mongol Empire. Imagine the hush of dusk settling over the grasslands, the rhythmic sway of a sturdy little Mongol horse beneath you, and the whisper of wind through your fur-lined deal. You're not some warrior charging into conquest. No, tonight you're something far more important, a courier. A trusted rider of the mighty Yam, the vast postal network that stitched together one of history's largest land empires. And just so you know, you probably won't survive this. The average postal courier was expected to ride dozens of miles a day in any weather, change horses on the fly, avoid wild wolves, and still arrive with a sealed message untouched by rain or rebellion. Your modern legs? They're not ready. And your phone's got no signal here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all are listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The grass is still damp from yesterday's rain as you adjust your saddlebag and check that the small wooden box tied to your waist is still tightly shut. It doesn't look like much, just a carved container of birchwood with a wax seal, but it carries a message written in delicate brushstrokes, sealed by a prince. To the man waiting 400 miles away, it might as well be a royal decree from Genghis Khan himself. You give your horse a pat on the neck and shift your weight. You're about to begin one leg of the Great Yam, the Mongol postal system. They don't call it yam like it's a root vegetable. It actually comes from a Turkic word meaning route or post station. And this web of roads, yurts, and horse relays was the beating heart of Mongol logistics. You might picture mailboxes and street addresses, but this system was something else entirely. Far more flexible, mobile, and just a little bit chaotic. But it worked. Oh, it worked astoundingly well. Some records suggest couriers could travel 200 to 300 kilometers in a day, which, considering the terrain, still puts modern express delivery to shame. This section of the Yam you're on stretches from Karakoram, the Mongol capital, out toward the foothills where a military envoy is stationed. It's a medium route, meaning you're only traveling about 80 miles today, only you'll switch horses 3 times and stay at a temporary yurt station where a family lives year-round just to feed couriers and tend fresh mounts. These people don't even see themselves as part of a profession. They're just one cog in the greater machine, supporting the will of the Khan. You kick off the ride at a steady trot, saving your horse's strength for later. The path is barely marked, just flattened grass from earlier riders. A falcon drifts overhead, catching the wind thermals lazily, its eye scanning the plain. You wonder idly if it's been trained by someone, or if it's just here to watch, the way all birds seem to be. About 10 minutes in, you pass an old stone cairn. It marks the start of this particular route segment. You don't stop, you just nod at it like an old friend. Some say these cairns are ancient, older than the Mongols themselves. They're not just landmarks, they're talismans, warding off bad luck and watching over lone riders. One fringe theory, courtesy of a 19th century Russian explorer, claims the stones have etchings in an unknown script, possibly Proto-Mongolic. But historians still argue whether those markings are real or just weather scars. The horse snorts, drawing your focus back to the ride. You reach into your coat and pull out a small leather pouch. Inside is a lump of dried cheese, hard enough to chip a tooth, but salty enough to keep your energy up. You chew slowly. The taste is persistent. Mongol riders carried only what was absolutely essential: curds, dried meat, fermented milk, a knife, and their message. Somewhere up ahead, the next rider is waiting. He'll take your horse, you'll take his, and the message will continue toward its destination like a baton in a relay. It's simple, elegant, and surprisingly modern. And in this moment, riding through mist and morning chill, with no buildings, no fences, and not a single beep or buzz to interrupt you, it feels oddly peaceful. You nudge the horse into a canter just as a low yurt comes into view on the horizon. Smoke curls from its chimney, and you can already smell something stewing, probably goat, maybe mutton. Your stomach grumbles and you allow yourself to daydream just a little about resting your legs and warming your fingers by the fire. But that's later. For now, you ride, you deliver. You slow your horse as the yurt station draws near. It's not large, just one ger with a lean-to stable attached, and a trio of goats squabbling nearby like woolly children. A thin column of smoke curls upward from the chimney hole in the center of the roof, and you can just make out a figure squatting near a low fire pit, stirring something in a blackened pot. The air smells of boiled meat and smoke-dried wool, which isn't as bad as it sounds once you've been on the road a while. The woman tending the fire looks up as you dismount. She's older than you expected, with lines that stretch like dry riverbeds across her cheeks, and a braid that hangs thick and straight down her back. Without a word, she takes your reins and clicks her tongue at your horse, leading it toward the stable. Another figure, her son maybe, appears from behind the yurt, carrying a bucket of water. You hand over the sealed message with a practiced motion. They don't ask what's in it. They never do. This yurt is one of thousands scattered across the empire. Together, they form the soft, breathing backbone of the Mongol communication machine. Unlike Roman milestones or Chinese courier walls, these postal stations weren't built from stone or brick. They were mobile, adaptive, and, when necessary, utterly disposable. The brilliance wasn't in their permanence, but in their ability to move wherever the Mongols needed them. You didn't build around the system came to you. Why yurts? Why not forts or watchtowers like other empires used? The answer is gloriously simple. Mongols moved a lot. And rather than dragging a sluggish bureaucracy behind them, they built a communications web that could gallop at the speed of need. A yurt, called a ger in Mongolian, is a collapsible, felt-covered tent supported by a circular wooden frame. It can be set up in under 2 hours, and when the time comes, packed down and hauled away on a pair of oxen. Forts, too slow, too visible. Too heavy. You duck your head and step inside. The inside is warm and dark, lit by a central hearth where that stew continues to bubble. A child naps in one corner, a pair of worn boots set beside him. The air is thick with the comforting smell of earth, smoke, and wool. You're handed a bowl of soup, no meat in it today, just turnips and onion, and settle near the door. You sip slowly, grateful for the break. Outside, the horse you'll take next is being saddled. It's smaller than yours, but you know better than to judge by size. Mongol horses were famously tough, bred for endurance rather than glamour. They could survive on dry grass, sleep standing up, and navigate treacherous mountain passes without faltering. Some scholars even argue these horses were more important to Mongol success than the bow and arrow. Then again, historians still debate whether it was logistics or sheer terror that made the Mongols so unstoppable. Either way, you're grateful for the beast waiting for you now. As you eat, the older woman hands you a long strip of felt, folded tight and still warm from the fire. Inside is a dried cheese curd and a strip of pressed jerky, road food. You tuck it into your satchel and smile your thanks. She doesn't smile back. Her job isn't hospitality, it's precision. These postal yurts weren't open to just anyone. Only riders with official clearance could use them, usually granted by a garage, a special passport we'll talk more about later. For everyone else, the yam was off limits. Locals who interfered with postal stations, or heaven forbid, stole a courier's horse, faced harsh penalties, including exile or execution. The network was sacred and strictly regulated. You glance around the interior again. Near the back wall, hanging from a leather thong, is a tiny wooden tag burned with 3 symbols. It's a rudimentary inventory. How many horses are housed here? How much grain remains, whether any couriers are overdue? Mongol efficiency didn't require parchment or bureaucracy. Just good memory, good horses, and good stew. Outside, the sun has crept higher. You stretch your legs and prepare to mount your fresh horse. But before you go, the woman hands you a rolled-up piece of rawhide tied with a strand of horsehair. Another message. This one is going the same direction as yours and will be passed along when you switch mounts again. It smells faintly of smoke and butterfat. You climb into the saddle and give the older woman a nod. She doesn't return it, but the boy waves. Just once, a quick flick of fingers before vanishing behind the yurt. Your new horse twitches its ears and snorts, impatient. The trail ahead is barely marked, but you've got a rough idea of where to go. The next yurt station is 50 kilometers away. You'll gallop, then canter, then gallop again in bursts designed to preserve the horse's strength while shaving off hours from the journey. You'll follow rivers, skirt foothills, and avoid the patches of steppe where wolves like to lounge. As you ride off, the yurt shrinks behind you until it's just a blur on the horizon. You won't see this one again. Next time it might be 5 miles further east, or not there at all. That's the beauty of Mongol infrastructure. It breathes. The sun begins its lazy arc across the sky as your new horse settles into a steady rhythm. It's a mare this time, short-legged and compact, but with a muscular gait that suggests she's done this route more times than you've eaten hot meals. Her ears flick back toward you occasionally as if checking that you're not going to do anything foolish, like steer her toward a snake pit or uphill gallop. After about an hour, you spot a rider coming toward you from the opposite direction. You slow, raising a hand in acknowledgement. He does the same, but doesn't stop. Couriers pass each other in silence more often than not, like ships at sea. If either of you had a serious problem, you'd break form and shout. Otherwise, it's just a brief flicker of recognition, 2 parts of the same machine briefly passing in opposite currents. Soon, you begin scanning the horizon for your next stop. Another gear, another transfer. This one is a horse relay station. Just a brief pause to switch mounts and keep the momentum, and here Mongol efficiency shines like polished bone. The Yam network was structured with relay stations, called Ertege, every 25 to 30 kilometers, spaced just enough for a horse to run full tilt before needing a rest. Imagine it. Over 200,000 horses dedicated solely to communication, stationed across vast stretches of Central Asia, ready at any moment. As the GR comes into view, you can already see a fresh mount waiting, hitched loosely to a post and munching grass. The family here has spotted your dust trail well before your arrival. That's part of their job. Anticipate, prepare, and never keep a courier waiting. Time, after all, was the only luxury the Mongols refused to waste. You dismount in a practice slide and hand off the reins. The man at the station barely glances at you before thrusting a water skin into your hand. It's filled with arak, fermented mare's milk. The taste? Well, it's sour, slightly fizzy, and smells like someone forgot yogurt in a saddlebag. But it's cold, and that's what matters. You take a few swigs, wipe your mouth, and sling the rawhide message from the last yurt onto the fresh mount's saddle loop. There's a joke among couriers. If the horse can still breathe, you're not riding fast enough. It's a joke, yes, but only barely. These horses are conditioned for sprints, not marathons, so the key is rotation. Fresh mount, fresh legs, rinse, repeat. You mount up and nod at the station keeper, who gives you a grunt of acknowledgement. That's probably the friendliest response you'll get today. Mongol couriers weren't praised for pleasantries. They were praised for punctuality. Historians still argue whether these stations were purely functional or also served as intelligence hubs. Some records suggest they were used to gather reports on weather, uprisings, and enemy movements. Others think that's overblown romanticism, a tendency among modern writers to imagine every footstep in the past as dripping with intrigue. Still, it's hard to ignore the fact that the Yam gave the Mongols a near psychic awareness of what was happening across their empire. Messages move faster than rumors. Decisions could be made in days that would have taken months elsewhere. Whether it was mail, intel, or magic is anyone's guess. You turn your new horse toward the northwest and urge it forward. The wind picks up a bit, dragging wisps of grass and dust across the trail. This part of the route curves gently around a shallow basin where herds of wild sheep graze. You catch a glimpse of something shiny nestled among the rocks, a forgotten stirrup maybe, or a bit of old armor. You don't stop to investigate. There's no time, and besides, ghosts are common out here. Most just wear rust. As you ride, you reflect on how absurdly advanced this whole operation is. In Europe, communication still involves town criers and slow-moving messengers on muddy roads. Even the Chinese, with their organized bureaucracy, rely heavily on foot couriers for much of the inland message relay. But here on the open steppe, letters move with the wind. Every time a horse is swapped, the message keeps moving. Every time a rider hands off a satchel, the chain remains unbroken. And because of this system, orders from the Khan can reach the furthest outposts in mere days. It's not just clever, it's borderline terrifying. How do you conquer half the known world? You start by making sure the horses never stop. Your own legs are starting to ache again. You shift in the saddle and try to stretch discreetly. Another hour and you'll be at the next major stop. This one will offer food, a chance to rest your horse longer, and maybe, if the family is generous, a fresh pair of socks. Mongol hospitality isn't what you'd call warm and fuzzy, but when it comes to the yam, it's ruthlessly consistent. Ahead, the clouds begin to gather slightly, casting pale shadows on the hills. The road continues, curving gently through the grasslands like a ribbon laid by a god with a sense of geometry. You lean forward, pat your horse's neck, and keep riding. Always forward, always to the next station. By mid-afternoon, your legs feel like overcooked noodles, and your hands are numb from the wind. But finally, you spot it. A pale blur on the horizon, slowly resolving into the familiar round outline of a postal yurt. There's a low fence made of piled stones, a signal that this station is semi-permanent, likely used by high-ranking messengers or more sensitive deliveries. A plume of smoke curls into the sky from the chimney, and the smell of roasted something drifts through the breeze. You pull up to the yurt and are greeted not by a person, but by a large dog the size of a small yak. It trots up, sniffs your boots dispassionately, and then wanders off, apparently unimpressed. A man follows behind it, tall, weather-worn, with a long mustache that droops past his chin. He doesn't speak. Instead, he raises an eyebrow and gestures to your saddlebag. This is one of the higher security GER stations, a place used for dispatches that aren't meant to fall into the wrong hands. Before you can pass along your message, the man produces a long, narrow tablet carved from silvered wood. You recognize it immediately, a girij. This is the passport of the Mongol courier system, and it's as good as royal blood when it comes to getting things done. Each giregi was marked with the seal of the Khan, and often inlaid with precious metals. The presence of one meant you had official permission to travel, rest, demand a horse, or eat anywhere in the empire. Without it, you'd be a trespasser. With it, you were the living embodiment of the state's will. Some were simple tokens of bone or iron, others elaborately decorated. Marco Polo, in fact, describes one with gold letters that shimmered in the firelight. Though historians still debate whether Polo exaggerated a bit, he did have a flair for the dramatic. The station keeper inspects the seal on your message, then nods and motions toward the yurt. Inside, you find a makeshift desk covered in bone-handled knives, rolls of cured hide, and an inkstone. It's not a bureaucratic office, not in the modern sense, but it functions with ruthless efficiency. Messages here are copied, recorded, and sometimes duplicated for multiple routes. You hand yours over and watch as another courier enters from the back door, likely returning from a westward route. This yurt functions as a node, a junction where multiple relay paths meet. While many stations are simple one-in, one-out affairs, these hubs are more like communication spiders, gathering, spinning, and sending out new threads. You take a seat on a low cushion and accept a bowl of broth, thin but hot. Your fingers tremble slightly from fatigue, so you use both hands to steady the bowl. You lean back, watching the hustle of quiet motion. A young boy brings in a folded felt package and hands it to one of the riders. Another woman inspects horse tack for wear. There's no shouting, no rushing, just the steady pulse of movement, like a heart beating beneath layers of wool and leather. Your gaze drifts to a leather-bound scroll case on a nearby shelf. It's etched with runes you can't read, possibly Uyghur script or early Mongolian. One of the more niche theories among scholars suggests that these symbols were used as codes, not just languages, to further encrypt messages. It's not proven, but it certainly adds to the mystique. You wonder for a moment what kind of message you just delivered. Was it a routine supply report? A secret missive between generals? A list of goat taxes? You'll never know. And that's part of the job. Couriers were chosen for their reliability, not their curiosity. The fewer questions you asked, the longer you tended to live. You rise slowly, legs protesting, and make your way back outside. The light has shifted now, mellowing into that buttery gold that stretches shadows and warms your skin. A new horse has been prepared, a deep brown stallion with shaggy hooves and a white streak on its forehead. It regards you with the same skeptical patience as the last one. You mount up, take one last sip from your water skin, and nudge your mount into motion. You're not heading directly to the next gear this time. Your route veers off slightly to a side path used for less traveled but strategically important lines. These detours are part of what made the Yam such a marvel. It wasn't a single road, but a web, able to adapt in real time to needs, emergencies, or weather conditions. Like veins branching from a heart, always pushing life to the farthest limbs. As the sun begins to dip lower, you feel the cold rising again from the steppe. The horse picks up speed without your asking. Maybe he knows what you're carrying. Maybe he's just eager to run. Either way, you settle into the rhythm again. Forward, always forward. You press onward across a stretch of open land where the steppe rolls out flat as a tabletop, save for the occasional clump of shrubs that shiver in the wind. The air has taken on that late afternoon sharpness, cool but not quite cold, and the sound of your horse's hooves strikes a steady rhythm against the hardened turf. Somewhere off to the east, a column of birds rises suddenly from the grasses, wheeling in unison before disappearing into the pale sky. You glance over your shoulder, but there's no one behind you. Not yet, anyway. The route you're on now is a quieter branch of the Yam, less trafficked but no less important. In fact, these quieter stretches were often the most critical. Messages with sensitive information, diplomatic reports, or instructions for covert military movements were sometimes rerouted to avoid attention. Not that anyone could read what you're carrying. It's sealed with a signature of authority, stamped in red ink onto rolled birch bark, the kind used for private letters. But here's the odd part. Not all Mongol messages were on paper or bark. In some cases, couriers carried silk scrolls, waterproof and pliable, able to survive being dropped in a river, or worse, caught in a sudden downpour. Silk, light and durable, was surprisingly well suited to the postal service. In fact, there's at least one account of high-ranking messages being embroidered, not written, stitched by hand into the fabric by scribes, with a flair for security. Historians still argue whether this was ceremonial or practical, but it's the kind of thing that makes your average courier feel like they're transporting treasure. You shift in the saddle, your left leg beginning to go numb again. The message you're carrying now is wrapped in cloth and tucked deep in your satchel. You haven't dared peek, of course, but you can feel the weight of it, slightly heavier than the usual scraps. Maybe it's a military map. Maybe it's an inventory list for a mobile forge unit. Maybe it's nothing more than a formal thank you letter from a general to a provincial governor. Still, you ride with a little more care, just in case. The trail here narrows, threading between two low hills, both crowned with stunted trees. You pass a pair of stone markers, ovu, ritual cairns where travelers leave offerings. A small pile of blue ribbons flutters on one of them, tied around a stick like prayer flags. You consider stopping to leave a pebble, as tradition suggests, but decide against it. Time, as always, is pressing. About halfway through the ravine, your horse abruptly halts, ears pricked forward. A moment later, you hear it too, a faint clatter, stone on stone, metal on rock. You reach instinctively for your riding crop, though it's more for show than defense. A figure steps out from the rocks, a fellow courier, judging by the seal on his cloak. He raises a hand in greeting and gestures toward the horizon behind him. Turns out the next station is down, literally. Heavy rains last week washed out part of the riverbank, and the yurt was temporarily relocated 2 miles north, up on higher ground. Mongol postal workers were nothing if not adaptable. You nod your thanks and guide your horse up a grassy slope. It's during this detour that the wind shifts. You catch a sharp scent in the air, smoke, but not campfire smoke. This is different, hotter. Oily, a signal fire maybe. The Mongols sometimes used coded flame towers or smoke signals to transmit simple messages, enemy approaching, delay expected, or warning of storms. The technique wasn't unique to the Mongols, of course. The Chinese used them along the Great Wall centuries earlier. But unlike stationary towers, the Mongols employed mobile fire codes, burning dried dung in specific patterns to send warnings across vast distances. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. The smell fades quickly, whisked away by the wind, and soon you spot the yurt, perched awkwardly on a sloped rise, its felt walls bulging slightly in the breeze. A trio of horses is tethered nearby, stomping restlessly. The station keeper here is a young woman, no older than 17, with a shaved head and a serious expression. She takes your message, inspects the seal, and hands you a flask of warm broth without a word. You sit on a flat rock nearby, rolling your shoulders and staring out across the land you just crossed. It's hard to imagine that the empire, so vast, so seemingly uncontrollable, relied on places like this. On yurts perched on hills, on teenage girls with good instincts, on dogs and goats and messages wrapped in silk. And on you. You finish your broth, stretch your back, and ready your mount. The next ride will be long, across open plains where there are no cairns, no detours, and no guarantee that the next yurt will be where it's supposed to be. You ride anyway, because that's what you do. As the plains unfurl ahead of you, impossibly wide and tinged with golden light, you find yourself riding into one of those pockets of silence that only the steppe can offer. No birds, no wind, not even the creak of your saddle, just the quiet hum of your own breath and the faint thud of your horse's hooves pressing into the earth. For a moment, it feels like time has stopped, like the yam has become not a network of messages, but a long dream you're riding through. The rhythm of the journey lulls you. Your horse moves without much prompting now, instinctively following the invisible paths etched by generations of couriers. Occasionally, you pass the skeletal remains of a long-forgotten fire pit, or the half-collapsed bones of a yurt frame, swallowed slowly by grass. Each one a silent witness to the scale and impermanence of the system you serve. And then you reach a checkpoint. Not a station with stew and horses, but a checkpoint for identity, a narrow ridge where a man waits, seated cross-legged beside a staff planted in the ground. Hanging from the staff is a carved wooden tablet, polished smooth by wind and fingertips, a gerege, the Mongol courier's passport. You approach slowly, the sun at your back, and present your own. The man rises, inspects your token. It's bone, etched with looping script and worn at the edges from constant handling. He turns it over once, nods, and steps aside, allowing you to pass without a word. The gerege was more than just a travel document. It was a declaration of status, carved with the official stamp of the Khagan. Some were inlaid with bronze or silver for senior messengers. Others, simpler but no less powerful, bore only the imperial tamga, a flame-like symbol that meant, in effect, this rider goes where the Khan wills. Even foreign envoys were sometimes granted a gerege. Marco Polo claimed to have carried one himself, which allowed him to cross borders and draw fresh horses from the yam as needed. Historians still argue whether his account is entirely true. Did he embellish? Did he even make the journey at all? Scholars in Venice and Mongolia still politely throw shade across continents on the matter. But the idea holds. Possessing a garage meant you weren't just on a mission. You were the mission. It also meant protection. No village dared delay a courier with a garage. No innkeeper could deny them food. No local could refuse a request for shelter. In a society where loyalty to the Khan defined social order, interfering with the postal service was almost like slapping Genghis Khan in the face, which, to be clear, would not have ended well for anyone. There's a fringe theory that Jarija tablets evolved from shamanic amulets, tokens of authority carried by spirit mediums across the plains. It's not widely accepted, but there's something a little mystical about them. The way they pass from hand to hand, never speaking, but always speaking volumes. Your horse picks up speed now as the land tilts downward and opens into a low valley where the grass is taller, lusher. A stream glints ahead, snaking lazily through the flatland. You slow to let your horse drink and take a moment to breathe. This section of the YAM is quieter, less direct. It's used primarily for mid-level dispatches. Important but not urgent. The kind of information that shapes long-term strategies, not daily operations. Still, the expectation is that you'll deliver it within the day. No excuses. The YAM waits for no one. Across the stream, you spot a group of children chasing a dog near a cluster of yurts. They shout something in a language you only half understand, probably a joke about your floppy hat or muddy boots. You wave anyway. One of them tosses a handful of wildflowers into the air, and for a moment it looks like a miniature parade. You don't stop. This isn't a leisure ride. But moments like these, small, bright flickers in a sea of repetition, are why riders kept going. As the sun dips closer to the horizon, you know the next major yurt station isn't far. This one will be larger, with multiple riders converging for evening handoffs. You'll eat properly, sleep if you're lucky, and hand off at least one of the scrolls you're carrying. Maybe even get news from the capital, rumors at least. You check your satchel again, feeling for the silk-wrapped message. Still there, still warm from the press of your leg against it. You wonder again who it's for and what it says. You'll never know, but someone will. And that's enough. The YAM lives and breathes through you, and you, for now, keep riding. The shadows stretch long across the plains as you near the next station, one of the larger waypoints, a veritable hub for the YAM network. From a distance, it looks like a small village, with half a dozen yurts clustered together, and at least 20 horses tethered in a wide circle nearby, munching patiently on hay or snoozing on their feet. A few couriers are already there, some finishing meals, others stretching tired legs or repairing frayed tack. You ease your horse toward the enclosure, grateful for the pause. Your back feels like it's been folded in half, and your legs have taken on that stiff wooden sensation that only a full day's ride can offer. A stable boy appears almost instantly, taking your reins without a word, and your horse gives a relieved snort. As the boy leads it away, you pull your satchel close and head toward the largest yurt. Inside, the light is warm and flickering. A brazier burns low in the center, and bowls of dried fruit, pickled cabbage, and smoked fish sit along the rim. You nod in greeting to the others inside. Most return the gesture. A few are already asleep in the corners, wrapped in thick felt blankets, their feet still caked with dust. You find a spot near the fire and carefully unstrap your satchel, easing it into your lap. One of the station clerks, a man with bright eyes and a jaw like a tent peg, approaches with a clay tablet. He doesn't ask what you've brought. He simply holds out the tablet and waits. You press your thumb into the clay, leaving an impression that proves your arrival. He marks it with a reed stylus and disappears back into the shadows. In this yurt, records are kept not with parchment and ink, but with memory and a few ancient tools. These clay logs will be smoothed and reused later, but for now, they serve as the official ledger of movement. The YAM doesn't boast massive archives. It's too transient for that. Yet, somehow, nothing is forgotten. You pull out the silk-wrapped message. The clerk takes it, nods once, and tucks it away into a case that's locked with a bone pin. A new courier will take it from here, perhaps heading east toward the mountains or south to the desert towns where market caravans bring Chinese porcelain and Persian carpets. Your job, for now, is done. But only this leg. You're given another scroll, this one bound in leather and sealed with wax. A message going west, back along one of the more established lines. It's likely less urgent, but it still requires your attention. The courier system never truly rests. You glance around and catch snippets of conversation. One rider's talking about wolves seen too close to the path. Another is grumbling about a storm that turned the southern route into a swamp. Someone else mentions a Chinese merchant whose ox cart overturned trying to cross a river, blocking one of the minor trade arteries. Rumors, updates, warnings. It's all information, moving through the air just like the scrolls. You lean back and sip from a bowl of hot milk tea, sweetened with a bit of honey. It burns your tongue, but you don't care. It's the first thing you've tasted today that didn't feel like a punishment, and it gives you a moment to think about how this system, this entire organism of horses, yurts, riders, and messages functions without printed schedules, without GPS, without any fixed infrastructure. There are no maps nailed to walls, no charts to study, and yet, somehow, you always know where to go. You always find your way. Historians still debate how much of the yam was formalized and how much was just institutional muscle memory. Some suggest that detailed written instructions existed, perhaps even illustrated manuals, but none have survived. Others argue it was all oral, passed down rider to rider like song lyrics, refined over years until every stretch of land, every subtle bend in the step was stored in the body. A fringe group of scholars even claim that certain postal routes mirrored the migration patterns of ancient nomadic clans, making the yam a kind of cultural echo of movements thousands of years old. Is it true? Maybe. Or maybe it's just the kind of dreamy theory you come up with when you've read too many scrolls and not smelled enough horse sweat. You rise, stretch, and step outside. The air is cool, and the sky is deepening into that kind of blue that almost leans purple. Stars are starting to flicker into view, hesitant but familiar. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once. A fire crackles. Another courier laughs loudly before being shushed by a sleepy neighbor. You walk slowly toward the tethered horses, where a fresh mount waits, smaller, perhaps younger than your last. It paws the earth and snorts as you approach. You rub its nose and whisper something nonsensical. It doesn't care. It just wants to move. You mount up again, scroll secure, and turn west. You ride now, not just for speed, but to beat the dark. There's no moon tonight, and the steppe can vanish when the stars go out. But you've done this before, and the road always finds you. The night swallows the plains around you as you ride. Without the moon, the world exists only in shades of suggestion. The flick of grass in your peripheral vision, the barely visible line of the horizon, and the gleam of starlight off your horse's damp flanks. You rely now not on your eyes, but on the instincts you've honed from dozens of midnight rides. The tilt of the ground, the subtle shifts in wind, and the feel of your horse as it picks its way forward with quiet confidence. You reach down and feel for the new message you were given, bound in oiled leather, sealed with wax. This one is thicker than usual, heavier, possibly multiple letters bundled together, maybe even maps. You wonder again what news it carries. A trade agreement, a shift in military orders. Perhaps a personal letter from a regional governor to his family in the capital. You'll never know, and that's by design. You're just a rider, a reliable shadow. It's times like these, with the darkness pressing around you and only the rhythmic rise and fall of hoofbeats for company, that your mind wanders. You think about dinner, what little of it you had. You think about warm blankets. You think about the couriers you've never met, riding in the opposite direction, maybe across completely different terrain. And you think about what the Mongols have built, this vast, invisible system threading across Asia, tighter than a spider's web and faster than rumor. What made it all possible? You'd think it was just the horses. And yes, the horses are critical. But really, it's the planning, the preparation. Take meals, for example. As rough and rustic as they may be, they're critical to the yam's success. At the larger stations, there are always supplies ready, not just food for riders, but feed for horses, extra tack, tools, firewood, and water. Meals are prepared quickly, but with precision. Dried lamb rehydrated in boiling broth, noodles cooked with salty curd, boiled dumplings filled with goat or onion, depending on what's available. It's not a feast, but it's fuel, and more importantly, it's consistent. Riders don't have to guess what they'll get. They know. Hot liquid, something to chew, and something to wrap in cloth for the next leg. Mongol cooking was built for motion, minimal waste, maximum energy. It's said that Genghis himself preferred these simple meals on campaign, believing that fancy food dulled the edge of hunger and speed. That's not to say riders didn't develop preferences. You've heard tales, probably exaggerated, of certain couriers requesting particular soups at certain stations, or becoming fiercely loyal to one family's version of milk tea. There's even a folk song about a courier who refused to leave a post until he'd had a second bowl of dumplings, risking the wrath of his commander. It didn't end well for the dumpling lover, but the tune is catchy. Some stations even grew herbs along the outskirts of their gear sites, wild chives, onion grass, sometimes mint. A tiny indulgence, sure, but one that turned a pot of boiled meat from functional into palatable. In summer months, dried fruits would occasionally appear, bits of wild apple or fermented berries folded into hard cheese to soften the salt. And on longer rides, those truly grueling week-long loops where no major station stood, couriers carried bortsog, a kind of deep-fried dough that kept for days and could be eaten cold or warmed on a saddle pan over a dung fire. Think, donut minus the joy. You reach one of those lonely food drop sites just after midnight. No yurts here, just a stone cache hidden beneath a cluster of rocks, marked with a chalk glyph that only couriers would recognize. You dismount, peel back the flat stone lid, and find your reward. A felt bundle containing dried meat, half a round of pressed curd, and miracle of miracles, a wrapped brick of Sagan ID, a white food made of fermented mare's milk dried until rock hard. You chew mechanically, your jaw aching, but it revives you just the same. You feed your horse a handful of grain from the packet tucked beside the food. This moment, this little pause in the dark, is the beating heart of the yam. A rider, a horse, a message. A meal, then on again. Historians still argue whether the postal diet was responsible for the surprisingly good health of Mongol couriers. Some say the dairy-rich, protein-heavy meals gave them stamina, unmatched by Western messengers. Others think it's revisionist myth-making. But anyone who's ridden these distances, on this land, knows the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Food kept the system moving, even if it tasted like salted stone most days. You pack what's left, mount up again, and press onward. The trail curves slightly toward a shallow ravine ahead. Somewhere on the other side is a low valley and, if you're lucky, a temporary station where you can rest. The stars burn cold above you. Your horse sighs and flicks its ears, and still you ride. By the time the pale edge of dawn appears in the east, you're descending into a wide basin where the air is noticeably colder and the dew clings to everything like a thin skin of silver. Your horse moves a little slower now, partly from fatigue, partly because it senses the coming change in rhythm. You've been riding all night. No torches, no lanterns, just the distant shimmer of stars and the steady trust in your route. And now, as the sky begins to brighten, you prepare for one of the most difficult parts of any courier's job, the winter routes. This basin is known among riders as a cold bowl, a place where cold air sinks and settles even in the warmer months. But in the heart of winter, when snows sweep down from the Siberian rim and freeze the rivers into glassy ribbons, these places become especially treacherous. Yet they were vital to the yam. The winter routes, while more dangerous, often cut across lakes and rivers, providing faster, more direct lines between major nodes, but they required both courage and creativity. You reach the base of the valley and spot the yurt, tucked into a shallow hillock and half buried in snowdrift residue from the last storm. It's smaller than most, but there's smoke curling from the chimney and a pair of shaggy horses hobbled nearby. A courier is just leaving as you arrive, blinking against the light and brushing crumbs from his sleeve. You exchange nods and pass each other without speaking. The rhythm of the yam allows no time for long conversations. Inside the yurt, the warmth hits you like a blanket. Someone's been up a while. A kettle of salted tea simmers over the fire, and a plate of fried dough sits beside it, the edges golden and crispy. A woman gestures for you to sit and pours a bowl. Her hands are chapped from the cold, but her movements are efficient. A toddler stirs beneath a felt wrap in the corner, still asleep despite the bustle. You remove your satchel and stretch your legs beside the fire. It's a brief reprieve, but enough. You sip the tea. It's briny, heavy on the butter, and deeply satisfying. You think again about the winter routes and how they work. Most people assume the postal system slowed in winter, but in many ways, it sped up. Ice turned rivers into roads. Snow flattened rough terrain. Riders used sleds pulled by ponies or even skates strapped to boots in more northern regions. One record from a Persian traveler mentions Mongol couriers traveling over 400 kilometers in just 2 days during peak winter, an astonishing feat, especially when the average European mail took weeks to cross a single kingdom. The key was preparation. Mongol couriers knew how to dress for the freeze. Multiple layers of felt and fur, boots lined with animal fat to prevent cracking, gloves sewn with tufts of wool at the fingertips for dexterity. Some even wore hoods with narrow slits to minimize exposure. And critically, horses were selected for their cold resistance. Small, sturdy, and able to find grass under snow, Mongol horses could outlast most breeds in punishing climates. You've only had a few deep winter assignments yourself, and frankly, you don't miss them. One particularly nasty run had you crossing a frozen river just as the ice began to crack. You had to dismount and lead the horse across while praying the weight wouldn't send you both through. At one point, the saddlebag slipped and skidded across the ice like a curling stone. You managed to recover it, but not before earning a colorful scar on your shin and a reprimand from your station master. Historians still argue whether the Mongols developed unique cold-weather postal technology or simply relied on old nomadic adaptations. There's some evidence of specialized gear, leather-wrapped boots with straw insulation, grease-sealed scroll cases, even horse blankets with bone clasps for quick removal. Others think these details were exaggerated by foreign observers who found the efficiency of the yam hard to believe. But when you've been out there in a blizzard, swapping horses with frost-bitten fingers, you know better. There's genius in simplicity. You finish your tea, press your hands once more toward the fire, and rise. The woman hands you a bundle of dried meat and a new satchel. This one is stiff and thick, possibly parchment scrolls or folded hide maps. It's marked with the imperial seal, glowing faintly with rubbed red ink. You bow your thanks and step back into the dawn. The cold hits harder now that you've been warmed. Your next horse waits, already saddled and stamping at the ground. You swing into the saddle and glance toward the east. The sky is fully alive now with sunrise, a deep band of orange smearing across the horizon like a brushstroke. The steppe stretches out in endless stillness, as if bracing itself for the day's movement. You ride again, wind slicing through your coat, satchel bouncing gently at your side. In a few hours, you'll cross into another province. The terrain will change again, as will the language, the customs, the tea. But the yam stays the same. Horses, yurts, messages, one hoofbeat at a time. And still you ride. The sun is high now, but its warmth feels more symbolic than literal. The air still carries the bite of last night's chill, and your breath hangs in faint clouds with every exhale. You've entered a different kind of landscape now. Flatter, drier and speckled with low shrubs that crackle softly as your horse threads between them. The open grasslands of the steppe have given way to something closer to semi-desert, where the wind scours the land bare and sound travels just a little too far. It's in this sparse place that you encounter a special breed of mount, one of the prized long-distance horses bred specifically for the yam. These aren't show horses or war chargers. They're smaller, stockier, with legs like spring coils and lungs like bellows, built for endurance, not drama. The one awaiting you at the next station has a short tail, a thick chest, and an expression that clearly says, "I'm going to run, and you're going to hang on." You dismount, hand over your current mount to a stable boy, and approach the new horse. Its coat glistens with a fresh rub-down, and its eyes are bright with expectation. You pat its neck, sling your satchel into place, and swing up. The moment you give the signal, it launches forward like a pebble from a sling. You nearly lose your hat. Mongol horses were everything to the yam. Without them, the system would have collapsed. While other empires relied on oxen or mules for overland transport, the Mongols knew the key to communication was speed, and speed came on 4 hooves. Their horses were semi-wild, often grazing free when not in use, and trained to obey voice and knee pressure more than reins. Historians agree that Mongol horse breeding was one of the most sophisticated programs of its time. Mares were carefully selected for stamina, foals trained early for saddle and pack, and stallions rotated regularly to prevent overuse. But a lesser-known fact, perhaps more folklore than fact, is that some couriers formed lifelong bonds with certain horses. There's a famous tale of a rider who refused to switch out his horse for an entire week-long journey, not out of sentiment, but because the horse knew the route better than the rider did. You believe it? You've ridden a few animals like that, ones who seem to anticipate bends in the path or dangers ahead, like the one now, surging forward with tireless purpose, as if it too carries the weight of the message. And here's a fun tidbit. According to one dusty Mongolian folktale, the best postal horses were said to be born during storms. Wind-born, they were called. Legend claimed they carried thunder in their hooves and could outpace the wind if given their favorite snack, fermented apples. Historians still argue whether this myth influenced actual breeding choices or just made for good drinking songs. But you'd be lying if you said you didn't check the sky the next time a colt was born at your home station. You crest a low ridge and catch sight of a dry riverbed ahead, one of those places that pretends to be a road when it's not full of water. The yam cuts across it at an angle, marked by a few sun-bleached wooden posts hammered into the ground. You slow just enough to let your horse navigate the gravel. The air grows still for a moment. You can hear the horse's breathing, your own heartbeat, the faint hum of distant insects, and then a burst of movement. A hawk, startled from its perch, lifts into the air and sails away on a current of wind. You watch it go and think, not for the first time, how much of the yam feels more like migration than logistics. You're not just delivering a letter, you're part of a pulse, a system that never sleeps, never stops. You reach the far side of the dry river and climb another small incline, where a tiny way station has been built beside a lonely poplar tree. Just a shack, really, little more than a windbreak, but there's a man there, waiting. You hand off a secondary scroll and receive a brief nod. He offers you water, a handful of dates, and points southwest. That's your next leg. As you ride off again, chewing the dried fruit, you marvel once more at how seamlessly it all works. No paperwork, no spoken words, just the silent machinery of trust and repetition. The Mongol postal system wasn't flashy. It didn't rely on bureaucracy or infrastructure in the modern sense. Instead, it thrived on what some might call chaos, but was actually exquisite design, mobile, adaptable, invisible when it needed to be, and it all hinged on these horses. These little, unstoppable, miracle-making horses that carried messages across mountains, rivers, deserts, and grasslands, not because they were trained to, but because they were born for it. You lean forward, press a hand to your horse's neck, and whisper, "Let's keep going." And it does. The sky begins to swell with heat as noon approaches, and the terrain beneath your horse's hooves hardens into a cracked, sun-bleached crust. You're in the heart of the drylands now, a region where yurts are few and far between, and a misplaced hoofstep could send your message bouncing into a ravine. The landscape here is vast, but not empty. You pass stunted trees with twisted trunks, patches of withered sagebrush, and in the distance, a herd of wild asses picking their way toward a salt lick. Your horse is steady even as the wind picks up and throws sand across your path. You lower your head and pull your scarf over your nose. This part of the Yam is notorious among couriers, not because it's impassable, but because it requires an added layer of trust in your route, in your animal, and in the quiet signs that mark your progress. The Mongols didn't build many road signs, of course, they didn't need them. But there were signals, subtle ones, carefully stacked stones at crossroads, horse skulls placed intentionally to face the correct direction. Ribbons tied to low branches, fluttering just enough to catch your eye. The entire postal system depended on riders being observant, intuitive, and quick to interpret the landscape. Which brings us to something unusual: the signaling systems. You crest a hill and spot, off in the distance, a thin column of smoke rising. Thin, deliberate, too controlled to be accidental. It flickers once, pauses, and then returns. You recognize the pattern immediately, a coded alert. Someone ahead is warning of delays, possibly flooded ground or a broken relay. You adjust your pace accordingly. The Mongols used a simple but effective set of signals for this exact purpose. Riders and station keepers could communicate with smoke by day, fire by night, and in emergencies, even through sound. Bone whistles, strung on rawhide cords, were carved to emit pitches that traveled for miles in open terrain. You carry one yourself, tucked into your belt. You've only used it twice, once to warn of a rock slide, once to signal for help when a fellow courier collapsed from heat exhaustion. Historians still argue whether the Yam incorporated these systems officially or whether they were the improvisations of clever station keepers. Some suggest that the whistles and smoke signals were relics from older nomadic tribes, absorbed into the Mongol machinery by necessity. Others believe Genghis Khan himself dictated certain patterns, especially in wartime. There's no consensus. But then again, the Yam doesn't care what historians think. It just works. You dismount briefly beneath a patch of thorn trees, letting your horse drink from a shallow water basin, a natural spring known only to local riders. The water smells faintly of sulfur, but your horse doesn't hesitate. You crouch and cup a little in your hand. It's warm, brackish, but enough to revive your dry mouth. As you stretch, you spot something carved into one of the tree trunks, a series of notches worn smooth from time. You run your fingers across them and smile. It's an old rider's mark, dating back decades, maybe more. Couriers sometimes left these symbols, hidden signatures to show they had passed, that they had made it. You leave your own, a simple crosshatch with a hook, your unique sign, carved low where the bark is soft. Then you mount up again. The path ahead winds through a narrow gorge where the air grows still and heavy. Your horse's hooves echo against the rock walls, and you slow instinctively, aware that these places, though beautiful, can also be dangerous. Flash floods, loose rocks, and bandits. You carry a small blade, but it's mostly symbolic. The real defense is speed. You emerge from the gorge into a wide, open stretch where the wind returns, sweeping sand across your face and tugging at your reins. It's here you hear it, a faint whistle, almost like a bird, but too regular. You turn your head and scan the horizon. Another rider, approaching fast. You slow your pace and wait. She draws close, a tall woman in a dust-stained cloak, riding hard. As she passes, she tosses something to you, a scroll wrapped in leather. "Double dispatch," she calls without stopping. You catch it, instinctively tucking it beneath your belt. Double dispatches happen when a message must be delivered twice by different routes, either for confirmation or in case of interception. Redundancy, Mongol style. You've got more work now, but you don't mind. Every message is a heartbeat of the Empire. You ride on, the sun now behind you, casting your shadow long across the road. The Yurt station isn't far, and you can already smell wood smoke in the wind. Another fire, another pause. Another handoff. The signals guide you forward, ever onward through wind and silence. As twilight begins to smear the horizon in shades of apricot and slate, you spot the next yurt in the distance, low and round, its felt covering tinged pink by the sunset. It sits atop a small rise, as if keeping watch over the plains, and a narrow trail of smoke wafts from its central chimney, promising warmth and rest. You ease your pace, grateful. It's been a long stretch since the last formal station, and both you and your horse are beginning to fray at the edges. The air cools quickly now, the way it does out here when the sun dips low. No slow fade, just a sudden bite. You dismount and lead your horse toward the hitching post, where two other ponies are already tied. One whinnies in greeting. Yours snorts back, unimpressed. The animals know this routine as well as the riders do. As you unstrap your satchel and brush sand from your boots, the yurt door opens and a man steps out, middle-aged with a sharp nose and a woolen hood pushed halfway back on his bald head. He nods once, taking the satchel from your shoulder without a word. You follow him inside. It's warmer than expected, and the smell hits you immediately. Mutton, boiling fat, and something spicy beneath it. A kettle rattles softly over the fire, and a slab of dried meat hangs above it, dripping slowly into the pot. Another courier lies on a felt mat near the wall, one boot off, the other leg crossed beneath him as he sharpens a short blade. He glances up, but says nothing. The language of the yam is mostly silence. You sit, stretch your legs, and rub warmth back into your fingers. The station keeper returns with a thin wooden board and gestures for you to press your thumb into a clay patch. Another arrival recorded, another line in an invisible ledger stretching from here to Karakoram. The man gives you a drink, a heavy, bitter broth made from fermented goat liver, if the smell is to be believed. You sip it with a grimace. It's not about taste, it's about nutrients. It'll keep you upright for the next leg. But before you go, there's a bit of conversation. Not casual, not exactly. Just enough to pass along a message. Something strange was seen along the northern route. A delay, possibly bandits, or a broken axle. The other courier murmurs something about shifting the mail routes for a few days, rebalancing the relay points. This sort of flexibility is the genius of the system. Stations can shift, riders can divert. The entire network breathes and adapts like a living organism, which leads to an open question historians still puzzle over. Was the yam just a postal system or something more? Did it serve secretly as a sprawling intelligence web? Was every station master a watcher, every message a code, every rider a silent spy? It's not a wild theory. There's documentation of couriers carrying not just scrolls, but verbal reports, memorized intelligence, casualty counts, troop movements, local disputes. One Persian historian described yam couriers as the breath of the Khan's mouth, heard in places he could not see. Another Chinese source, perhaps less poetically, described the system as a net made of hooves. But it's also possible we're reading too much into it. Perhaps the yam was exactly what it claimed to be, the fastest, most reliable post ever created before electricity. Maybe the occasional whisper or military update was just part of the job. No grand conspiracy, just good administration. Still, you wonder. After finishing your drink, you step back outside. The sun is just a fingernail above the horizon now, casting long shadows over the plains. A fresh horse is ready for you, a tall gelding with alert eyes and a coat like burnished copper. It's twitchy, as if it knows nightfall brings more than just cold. You mount up again, slinging your new dispatches close, one for the south route, one for a mobile caravan heading toward the western edges of the empire. You'll only go part of the way. Someone else will take it from there. That's the beauty of the yam. No one bears the full burden. The road is shared. You ride into the dusk, stars winking awake overhead. Behind you, the yurt vanishes into the grass. Ahead, the darkness stretches, waiting to be divided by your passage, and still you ride. The stars come out in clusters, sharp and white against the velvet sky, so clear you feel you could name every one of them if only you stayed awake long enough. But your horse doesn't need starlight. It knows this road. You loosen the reins and let it find its pace, your eyes scanning the land more out of habit than necessity. By now, your body runs on muscle memory, a long series of quiet adjustments, minor corrections, and the occasional shift to shake blood back into your legs. Your satchel holds 2 dispatches tonight, one for the caravan heading west and another for a field captain positioned somewhere near the old river crossings. You'll deliver both by dawn, if all goes well. But as you ride through this open patch of steppe, you can't help but think about how it all began. Not your ride, but the ride, the great postal vision of Genghis Khan himself. It's easy to imagine the Mongol Empire as a blur of conquests, sieges, and hooves thundering across Asia. But beneath that chaos was astonishing order. Genghis understood something that many rulers before him did not. Empires don't just grow by sword. They grow by information. You don't govern millions of people stretched across 2 continents without knowing what they're doing, where they are, and what they need. So the yam wasn't just a convenience. It was a pillar, a necessity, and it wasn't built by accident. Genghis personally ordered the creation of the yam early in his reign, laying out a plan for a network of stations, horses, and riders that would allow messages to pass with unprecedented speed. Some accounts suggest he modeled it on systems he'd observed in Central Asia. Others believe it was an expansion of earlier nomadic traditions. Historians still argue whether it was entirely his invention or just his refinement of existing methods. But whatever the case, he made it legendary. In the early days, the postal system was small, just a few dozen stations. But as the empire expanded, so did the web. Hundreds of relay points across thousands of kilometers, each stocked with horses, food, firewood, and families who knew exactly how to keep the machine moving. Each station was expected to care for at least 10 horses. The biggest ones, closer to 100. What's often overlooked is that the yam wasn't just for the elite. Farmers used it, soldiers used it. Even foreign merchants, if they had the right documents. There's an account of an Indian trader using the yam to send for help after a robbery on the Silk Road. His message reached Karakoram in less than a week. The robbers? They were reportedly buried up to their necks and left for the ants. The brilliance of the yam wasn't in its flash, it was in its rules. Strict schedules, severe punishments for delays or interference, horses rotated constantly. Riders trained not only in endurance, but in secrecy. Messages were sealed, and some dispatches were encoded with symbols understood only by their intended recipient. You carry one of those right now, a small scroll sealed with a wax triangle indicating military logistics. It's not meant to be read by anyone but the commander. You don't know what it says, but you can guess. Troop shifts, grain needs, or maybe it's just a reassignment notice. Still, it feels weighty in your bag, like it knows its own importance. You crest a ridge, and there it is, the faint glow of firelight from a traveling caravan. The Mongols didn't just build roads, they moved people, traders, scholars, emissaries, entertainers, all wrapped into the empire's bloodstream. This caravan is mostly wagons, tall, slow-moving, but surprisingly elegant. You ride toward them, careful to approach from upwind so the guards aren't spooked. A man spots you and raises a hand. He's wearing a thick wool coat and a fur cap that's clearly foreign, probably Persian or Georgian. He waves you in. You dismount, hand over the appropriate scroll, and exchange a few formalities. This caravan's headed west, carrying bolts of silk and barrels of salt. They'll stop at a major junction in 3 days. Your message will go the rest of the way from there. You're offered a bite of dried apricot and a sip of warmed kumis. You accept the fruit, decline the drink. Still riding, as you remount, the caravan begins to settle for the night. Fires are damped. Horses tethered. Someone plays a soft melody on a stringed instrument, something melancholy but steady. You listen for a moment longer than you mean to. Then, as always, you ride on. Ahead lies another fire, another exchange, but also something else, the growing sense that you are not merely delivering messages, you are riding inside the very lungs of the empire. Inhale, exhale, the road breathes through you. You press on into the deepest part of night, where even the stars seem tired and the world folds in on itself like a great sleeping beast. There's no sound now except for the crunch of hooves on frozen grass and the faint jangle of your gear. The caravan is long behind you. You've passed into quieter lands again, regions where the yurt stations are fewer and the couriers are lonelier. The land here rolls gently like the surface of a frozen ocean. Your horse moves confidently, still fresh enough from its last switch that it doesn't yet resent the cold. You glance back over your shoulder out of habit, but there's no one there. You are, as they say, the farthest outpost of communication tonight. And yet, even out here, in the near wilderness, someone is waiting. You reach the top of a rise and pause. Below, nestled near a river bend and surrounded by a half-circle of windbreak trees, is a solitary yurt glowing from within. A plume of smoke drifts upward, barely visible in the starlight. You urge your horse downhill and reach the door just as it opens. Inside, the space is dim and warm. A low fire crackles, and a young man greets you silently with a cup of hot tea already in hand. No small talk, just the cup, the nod, the glance at your satchel. You hand him one of your dispatches, the one sealed in red wax, meant for the nearby military commander. The man takes it and immediately walks to the rear of the yurt, where a heavy leather case sits waiting. He doesn't open it. He just places the message carefully inside and returns. As you sit and drink, you study the room. It's Spartan, even for a postal station. Just one bunk, a saddle rack, a set of spare tack, and a map carved into a board leaning against the wall. The map is crude but effective. Markings of rivers, relay points, and seasonal hazards burned into the wood by hand. One of the roads is marked with a black slash, washed out. Another with a sunburst, summer route only. And then there are the little chips in the wood, rider tallies. Every time someone passes through, they make a notch. You count at least 30 clustered near one corner, then realize they're all from this season alone. This place might feel isolated, but it's buzzing with silent life. You make your own mark before you leave, a simple vertical line beside the others. You're part of the map now. You mount up again and follow the narrow trail westward, a ridge path hugging the spine of the land. The air smells like snow, not actual flakes yet, but the scent of cold stone and wet earth that always comes just before the sky decides to freeze. You zip your coat higher and tap your heels against the horse's sides. Time to move. There's a point, maybe an hour later, when you come to the top of a plateau and just stop. Below you is a sea of land, a plain so wide and still it feels like the lid of the earth. Distant lights flicker in clusters, maybe towns, maybe other stations. You can't be sure. But one thing is clear, you're connected to all of them, not through wires or roads, through breath. Through boots and hooves and scrolls, there's a wind-up here. It pulls at your scarf and teases your sleeves. And in the stillness, you remember a story an old courier once told you about a message that outran a rebellion. A town in the south on the verge of revolt was expecting Mongol reinforcements in 3 weeks. The message from the capital arrived in 6 days. The rebellion collapsed before it even began. He swore it was true, said he delivered it himself. Historians still argue whether such feats were exaggerations, whether the timelines match, whether such speed was even possible. But as you sit atop this ridge, looking out over a world tied together by nothing more than horses and resolve, you believe it, because you've seen it. You're living it. You descend from the plateau slowly, carefully. Your horse picks its steps with the caution of a seasoned traveler, and the landscape rises around you again, like a book folding shut. Ahead is another fire. Ahead is another yurt, another handoff, and still you ride. The next yurt appears like a ghost, sudden, quiet, and completely ordinary. Just a round shadow resting on the land, tucked beside a copse of low trees with its felt sides rustling slightly in the breeze. You approach carefully. It's nearing the last stretch of this circuit, and you know better than to let your guard down. Even the calmest part of the yam has its moments of chaos. You dismount, and the yurt's flap opens with perfect timing. An older woman peers out, her hair streaked white and tied back with a leather thong. She sizes you up quickly, notes the satchel, and steps aside. No words, just invitation. Inside, the yurt is dim but dry. A small fire glows in the center, and the smell of boiling millet rises gently into the air. There's no rush here. You get the sense that this woman has been running this station for decades, seen riders come and go, dispatches whispered in panic, and nights too long to count. She hands you a warm cloth, damp with herbs. You press it to your face and breathe in something like thyme and sheep's wool. It's divine. As you sip a bowl of thick porridge, she leans over and shows you something, a small wooden box lacquered with age and tied shut with knotted cord. She unties it with a reverence usually reserved for ritual or mourning, and inside you glimpse a scroll unlike any you've carried. It's sealed with wax and bone, bound with braided horsehair. Not a military message, not a grain order, something else. Something ceremonial. "This one's going east," she says quietly, her voice hoarse with age. "To the temple at Otgontenga." You blink. That's a sacred site, a pilgrimage destination, not a military one. What could the yam have to do with a temple? The woman must see your confusion. She nods slowly. Sometimes the messages aren't for people. Sometimes they're for the gods. You take the box. It's not on your route, not tonight, but you'll pass it to someone who will make the detour. That's how the yam works. Like a great relay of hands, none needing to know the full journey, only their part in it. Historians still argue about the symbolic uses of the postal system. Some believe messages like these, meant for temples, holy men, or even mountain spirits, were a kind of spiritual insurance. A way to keep favor on the side of the empire. Others dismiss it as superstition, embellishments added later, but the artifacts are real. Boxes like the one you now carry have been found buried at sites across Mongolia, protected, preserved, and unread. You tuck the box carefully into a saddle pouch and mount up once more. Your next destination is the command post, a small fortified gur on the edge of the southern border zone. The message you've held all day will end there, opened, read, acted upon. As the trail rises again, you pass through a grove of whispering trees. The wind through their branches sounds like old paper, like voices reading messages long since faded. And there it is again, that quiet wonder that rides beside you more often than not. How many hands have carried messages like yours? How many hooves have worn this path? You're not just a courier. You're part of a living story, a pulse that beats across an empire held together by horses and trust. Ahead, the road curves sharply, and you see it. 3 yurts clustered beside a watchtower, lit by torchlight and ringed with horses. A man in armor stands by the entrance, his silhouette outlined against the flame. As you approach, he steps forward, his hand outstretched. You pass him the sealed scroll. He glances at the markings, nods, and turns away without another word. Your job here is done. You're handed a new packet, smaller, simpler. This one's for a merchant family 2 stations west. A routine notice, probably. But still, it must go. You mount your horse again and ease it back into motion. The sky is beginning to pale in the east, another sunrise. And still you ride. The first rays of morning stretch across the plains like fingers peeling back the darkness. You squint into the light. your eyes stinging with exhaustion, but your horse doesn't hesitate. It finds the path instinctively. You've ridden through most of the night, through silence, through winds, through fire-lit handoffs and cold water crossings. And now the road flattens ahead, stretching into the orange-gold distance with that hypnotic stillness that only the early morning step can offer. Your next assignment is lighter. The message you're carrying now is bound in plain hide, sealed with a merchant's mark, a circular emblem with 3 slashes. It's going to a textile family near the caravan route, likely instructions for trade timing, inventory, or tax updates. Not urgent, not secret, but necessary. That's something many forget. The yam wasn't just for emperors and generals. It was for everyone. And more than once, it was the daily, mundane dispatches that mattered most. Schedules, contracts, requests for grain or wool or salted fish. In a society as mobile and dispersed as the Mongol Empire, logistics were lifeblood. Not poetry, perhaps, but civilization nonetheless. The station you're approaching now is what they call a half-post, a smaller gyr that serves as a backup node. It's not staffed full-time, but run by a rotating group of families, each responsible for a few weeks of upkeep throughout the year. You spot smoke curling from the roof, a good sign that someone's home. As you near the entrance, you're greeted by a teenage boy who's busy brushing a mare's mane. He grins, a bit shy, and waves you in. Inside, the yurt smells faintly of sheep cheese and ash. A young woman tends the fire, and a toddler waddles around the felt mats, clutching a strip of dried meat like it's a prized relic. You offer your message, and she accepts it with a smile and a nod. Then, to your surprise, she pulls out a small ledger, not clay, not etched wood, but paper. She flips it open and carefully enters your arrival with a brush and ink, noting the date, time, route, and message seal. You raise an eyebrow. She sees your curiosity and shrugs. "Started using these last year," she says. Easier than burning the mistakes. Paper records on the yam are rare, partly due to mobility, partly because of risk. Fire, water, weather, all enemies of scrolls and books. But in quieter regions like this, where stations stay fixed for longer periods, the occasional written log makes sense. Some scholars argue that such records formed the basis of early Mongol administrative documents. Others insist that the vast majority of yam operations were never written at all, existing solely in memory and ritual. You sit for a moment and drink a small bowl of curdled milk, the tangy kind that wrinkles your nose but warms your belly. The toddler offers you a scrap of jerky, then changes his mind and toddles away with it. You smile, stretch your shoulders, and feel the ache settle deeper into your back. You ask, quietly, how often this family sees riders. 5 or 6 a week, the woman replies. More in autumn, when trade moves before the snow. She pauses, then adds, and sometimes they don't stop. Just shout their name, drop a message, and ride on. There's a rhythm to this network. Each part, no matter how small, knows its role. Even the children, when they grow, will likely carry messages of their own, or feed the horses, or build saddles, or cook the broth that keeps a courier moving. As you leave, the boy helps adjust your saddle. He's fast, practiced. You ask him if he plans to ride the yam when he's older. He grins. "I already do. Last week I carried a scroll 3 posts south." You nod and ride on. Not long after, you pass a small rise where an old cairn marks the split between routes. You dismount, add a stone to the pile, and take the left path toward a wooded area where your next delivery waits. The air is warming now, the light taking on a golden hue that glints off the tall grasses. Birds chirp. A herd of cattle grazes far off to the right, tiny shapes moving like shadows in the morning mist. This part of the yam is almost peaceful. The rush, the danger, the urgency, those are things of yesterday and tomorrow. For now, you ride through calm, and it's here you begin to realize something else about the system. It's not just about speed, it's about reliability. Messages don't have to fly, they have to arrive. Whether it's an imperial edict or a tax receipt or a warning about wolves near the northern ford, the true value of the yam is its consistency. No missed deliveries. No lost scrolls, just you, the horse, and the message, and still you ride. The woods ahead aren't thick by most standards, but here they feel dense. Tight-limbed birch trees and sparse pines hugging the trail like curious sentries. The path narrows into a winding ribbon between trunks, and you duck low as branches sweep past your head, occasionally catching on your coat. It's the kind of terrain that slows a rider just enough to make you feel watched. Your horse is cautious too, stepping with deliberate care. These forest routes aren't favored, but they're sometimes necessary, especially when weather or troop movement makes the open steppe unsafe. And lately, rumors have floated through the yam like dry leaves. Strange riders seen without tokens, packages gone missing, couriers delayed. Bandits? Possibly. Disgruntled locals? Maybe. Or just the unpredictable chaos of empire. You check your satchel for the 10th time today. Still sealed, still intact. This scroll is bound in red cloth and carries a faint scent of medicinal oil, most likely a report or request from a field medic or healer. These sorts of messages are usually urgent, not because they carry secrets, but because they request supplies, men, or mercy. As you ride, you pass something strange, a wooden pole planted into the earth, its top wrapped in faded ribbons. You slow and study it. It's not a postmarker. It's older, thinner, almost ceremonial, a prayer pole. You dismount, out of habit more than necessity, and place a small pebble at its base. A quiet offering. Not all yam couriers believe in the old spirits of the land, but few are willing to offend them either. You murmur a quick blessing, half-remembered words your grandmother taught you, and swing back into the saddle. Soon you hear it, rushing water. A creek, fast-moving and clear, winds its way across your path. There's no bridge. There never is out here. But there's a crossing point marked by two stones shaped almost like teeth. Your horse hesitates only slightly before stepping in. The cold soaks your boots in seconds, and the current tugs at your stirrups. But you're across in a matter of moments. A splash, a shake, and the trail opens again. Ahead, the trees begin to thin. The shadows fade. The air feels lighter. You're entering a border zone, a stretch of land where yam riders pass messages between military detachments stationed along the outer edge of the empire. You'll need to check in at a command gear just past the ridgeline, but first, there's trouble. As you crest the slope, you spot it. A toppled yurt, its frame broken and half covered by scattered felt. No smoke, no movement. You dismount cautiously, heart ticking just a little faster now. You approach with quiet steps, scanning for signs. Hoofprints, footprints, drag marks. You find all three. The station's horse post is empty, the saddles scattered, as if someone left in a hurry. The food cache has been smashed. A trail of prints leads into the woods, but the marks are jumbled, confused. You crouch beside the yurt and examine what's left of the logboard, charred at the edges but not completely destroyed. A name is still visible, Termer. You recognize it. He's a regular courier. Reliable. Something happened here, but what exactly you can't say. No blood, no bodies. But the place feels wrong, like a message left unfinished. You pull out your whistle and give one short blast, a long pause. Then another. It's not a cry for help, just a notification. Trouble here, route disrupted. If a rider's behind you, they'll know to divert. If not, it'll still echo to the next station. Historians still argue whether the yam ever operated a true rescue protocol. There are some accounts of riders being pulled from snowstorms by coordinated searches, or attacked and avenged by patrols. Others claim the system was too lean for such luxuries, that if a rider vanished, the message just moved without them. You choose to believe the former. You remount, uneasy now, and take the long path around the ruined station. It'll add 2 hours to your ride, but it's safer, and it brings you close to a military relay point. You'll report what you found. You ride faster now. The silence presses in again. but differently than before. You feel the tension in your horse, in your muscles, in the message against your hip. Sometimes the yam is peaceful. Sometimes it's not, and still you riot. You reach the military relay outpost just before noon, your horse lathered with sweat and your satchel tugging heavily against your side. The structure is a curious hybrid, half yurt, half wooden palisade. A pair of guards in thick, padded armor greet you at the threshold, their eyes narrowing slightly as they take in your dusty coat and the speed at which you've arrived. "Courier?" one asks. You nod and swing down from the saddle, wincing slightly as your knees protest. "Yam rider, dispatch from the southern loop." I passed a downed station, Jur 32, burned and stripped, rider missing, left signal blast, took the long detour. The guards exchange a quick glance, and one disappears inside. The other gestures for you to follow. Commander will want details. You step into a much more formal yurt than most, larger, structured like a council tent, with low benches, a central fire, and maps pinned along the interior in overlapping layers. A man sits at a writing table, lean, bearded, and still wearing his sword, despite the indoor heat. He doesn't stand when you enter, just gestures to the space across from him. You deliver the message first, your actual assignment, handed off with practiced precision. He sets it aside and then motions for you to recount what you saw. You do, calmly and without embellishment, noting the tracks, the smashed food, the lack of blood. "Bandits?" he mutters, more to himself than you. "Or deserters?" "Could be either," you reply. "Or someone sending a message." The phrase lingers in the air, a message within the message. You've heard stories of rival factions using the yam for sabotage, of rebels testing the state's communication reflexes. Some are probably exaggerations, but others, not so much. Historians still argue whether the Mongol yam was ever targeted systematically by internal enemies. Some believe its sacred status kept it safe, a neutral ground respected even by rebels. Others claim that's naive, that no empire lasts without its own fractures, and that riders like you were occasionally caught in the middle. The commander waves over a scribe, issues a few rapid orders, and then nods at you. "Get some food, a fresh mount's ready." "Stay off the main loop, use the water routes." You raise an eyebrow. "That'll take longer," he shrugs. "Not if you don't get ambushed." So that's how it'll be. You accept a satchel with replacement supplies, jerky, dried pears, a skin of kumis, and an extra whistle, and step outside into the hard light of afternoon. The outpost horses are lined up neatly beneath a lean-to, each one tagged with its name and last route. Yours is a short, sandy mare with a broad chest and deep eyes. She doesn't flinch as you mount, just starts walking almost before you're ready. You follow the creek bed westward, where the trail dips into low, marshy land. It's slower terrain, but safer. Thicker cover, more visibility, and less chance of being spotted from a ridge. The birds here are louder, the wind softer. You let yourself relax, just a little, and then, from behind a stand of reeds, you see movement. You stop. The horse shifts beneath you, ears flicking. A figure steps out, a courier, his coat muddy, his satchel torn, but unmistakable. He limps forward, favoring one leg, and raises a hand in cautious greeting. "Name?" you call. "Tomer." It's the rider from the burned yurt. He looks half dead, eyes sunken, a nasty gash crusted along one cheek, but alive. You dismount quickly and hand him your water skin. He drinks greedily, then gasps. "They came at night, not bandits. Not locals. Mongol uniforms, no tokens, you don't speak." "Just listen. They wanted the military satchel. I swallowed the seal." You stare. "That's dedication, and very, very grim. They didn't find it." "Burned the rest. I got away." He gestures at his gut. "Kept the seal in me. Message is gone, but the proof, they'll find it in me if I don't make it. You know what that means. The commander must be alerted." The message was compromised but not lost. The seal can be recovered, but only if Termer lives. You take out your second scroll, the less urgent one, and hand it to him. Take this to the merchant post. It'll get you help. They've got medics. He tries to argue. You silence him with a look. You've done your part. Ride. And then, as he limps off, you turn your mare and head the opposite direction. Back toward the command post. Back toward the fire. You're not the fastest rider today. But you're the one still carrying the line, and still, you ride. The return to the command post feels different now. Faster, colder, heavier. Every hoofbeat thuds with purpose, echoing not just across the ground beneath you, but somewhere deeper in your chest. You've carried urgent messages before. You've seen disrupted stations, but this is new. A rider attacked, military documents targeted, imposters in uniform. If what Termer said is true, and you believe him, it means someone has learned how to mimic the system. That's not just sabotage, that's precision. As your mare gallops across the ridge path back toward the fortified Ger, you review what you'll report. Not just the message being compromised, not just the stolen station, but the tactics, the false uniforms, the deliberate targeting of a Yam courier. They weren't stealing to survive. They were stealing to intercept. You crest the ridge and spot the post below, framed in hard afternoon light. The guards are still posted. The tower still burns low. The flags still flutter. And yet, the place already feels more vulnerable, as if now, after what you've seen, the veil has thinned, and you understand just how fragile even this machine can be. They let you in without question. The commander meets you in the same council yurt, and his face tightens as soon as he sees your expression. Termer's alive, you begin. He made it south, off trail. Wounded. He said the attackers wore Mongol uniforms. No tokens. They were looking for the dispatch. The commander rubs his temples and doesn't speak for a long while. Then quietly he asks, "Did they get it?" No, he swallowed the seal. The scribe at his side gasps softly. The commander simply nods. Of course he did. There's a long pause. The commander rises, opens a chest, and pulls out a long, narrow scroll case wrapped in black cloth. "Take this east," he says, "to the senior station master at Lake Hufskull. Hand deliver it." No relays, no handoffs, only you. You blink. That's 5 days' ride. Then you'd better leave now. You nod and accept the case. It's heavier than it looks. The black cloth bears no markings, no imperial seal, no script. Just a single line of red thread stitched down the center. It gives you chills. You're given a new horse, fresh, fast, one of their best. The kind that watches you with clever eyes and paws the earth even before you mount. Within minutes, you're off again. No ceremony, no audience, just a brief nod from the commander and the soft thud of hooves against dry grass. The landscape changes quickly as you ride northward. The terrain hardens into ridges and gullies with rocky paths cutting through long plateaus. It's a quiet region, few posts, few people. You pass one abandoned yurt, then a dry well, and once an overturned cart half buried in dust. Evidence of life long gone. You eat while riding, a strip of meat, half a rice cake, and what's left of your water. You don't stop. Not even to rest your mount. Every couple hours you walk the horse a few hundred paces to ease its legs, but otherwise you press on. You sleep for an hour, maybe two, seated in the saddle with your cheek resting against the pommel. It's not rest, it's survival. And in that semi-dream state, you begin to realize something you hadn't considered before. The Yam isn't just about communication. It's about continuity. Empires rise and fall, kings die. Fortresses burn, but the road, the path of one rider handing off to another, the thud of hooves carrying a message across hundreds of miles, that's what outlasts them. You ride through a shallow canyon on the second night, your breath fogging the air, and for a moment, you're surrounded by absolute silence. the kind that makes your ears ring. Then, out of nowhere, an owl bursting from a rock crevice, wings wide and soundless. You flinch, but your horse doesn't even blink. It keeps going, steady as ever, and you smile despite yourself. Historians still debate whether Yam couriers had any kind of training beyond the practical. Did they study maps, learn encryption? Were they taught how to sense danger, or did they just learn by doing? No clear answer survives. Most likely, the Yam trained riders the same way it moved messages, consistently, endlessly, and with no wasted motion. You climb the final ridge just before dawn on the third day. Below lies Lake Kovsgol, dark and massive and still, stretching out like a polished mirror. On its southern bank, the station cluster glows with soft light. You descend slowly, carefully. No need to rush now. The senior station master is already outside, waiting. Word travels ahead, even here. You dismount, remove the black-wrapped case, and place it in his hands. He nods once. You didn't open it? You shake your head. Didn't dare. He smiles just slightly. Good. That means the system still works. And with that, he turns away. You don't need thanks. You don't even need sleep, though your body begs for it. You just need another horse. And still you ride. By now, your limbs feel like wax, molded by the saddle, fused with the leather. Your fingers twitch involuntarily from reins that haven't left your grip in nearly 3 days. But the station at Lake Kovsgol gives you something better than rest: clarity. The message is delivered, the seals swallowed and saved, the system bent but unbroken. And that's enough. You sleep, finally. 3 full hours stretched on a thick felt mat inside one of the lakeside yurts, the scent of pine smoke curling around you like a lullaby. When you wake, there's food beside you. Millet bread, salty cheese, a boiled egg, and a ceramic bowl of pine tea. No one disturbs you. They know. When you step back outside, the lake is calm, shining under a pale blue sky. In the distance, geese cut lazy trails through the water, and clouds drift low over the northern peaks. A courier's paradise, still, cold, efficient. You meet the station master again, this time inside a well-organized work yurt. Scrolls are filed into cubbyholes carved into the walls. Clay seals rest in small trays. Along one wall, a massive fabric map stretches across the felt, stitched with dyed threads showing routes, stations, detours, and rivers. You run your hand across it. Every line means something. Every bend was earned on horseback. Need to ride again? He asks. You shake your head. No orders. He gives you a wry smile. Then maybe something easier. What he offers next is unexpected. A reverse run of a merchant message bound in oilcloth and sealed with a copper ring. It's routine. A confirmation of salt delivery, destined for a town 3 days west. But the route it follows is one you haven't ridden in months. The lowland track through grain country. You accept. You take a fresh horse, smaller and gentler than your previous mount, and begin again. The Yam never waits. Not for the exhausted, not for the heroic. Your last ride was extraordinary. This one will be ordinary. But both are essential. And here's something funny about those quieter routes. They're where the strangest stories live. Not the high drama of espionage or war, but the quiet oddities. The inexplicable, the forgotten. You pass through the village of Sagan Ul that afternoon, a place with a single relay yurt and a population of mostly elderly herders. They wave as you pass, and one of them, an old woman with 2 front teeth and a fur hat far too big for her head, calls out a joke in a dialect you don't quite understand. You laugh anyway. You stop at the station, and the keeper insists on feeding you hot barley soup with pickled radish slices on top, his wife's specialty. He tells you about a courier who once rode the entire winter with a broken arm and delivered not only the message, but 2 foals. You suspect it's a tale told often. Still, you nod and say, impressive. You ride on, belly warm, legs sore, heart surprisingly light. At one point, you pass a child standing alone on the side of the path. He's holding a stick and waving it slowly in the air, like a conductor. As you approach, he calls, "Are you the rider of the Thunder Scroll?" You shake your head, amused. "No thunder today, just salt." He seems satisfied and returns to waving his stick. Historians often focus on the grandeur of the Mongol system, the speed, the innovation, the political reach. But they rarely mention the culture it created along the routes, the familiarity, the folklore, the strange rituals and half-joking legends. The Yam made not just communication possible, but community. If you passed through a place more than twice, they remembered you. They knew your favorite food, your horse's name, the way your boots creaked when you dismounted. You stopped that night at a station near the river Bendurken, where the horses drink from wooden troughs and the fire crackles softly under a pot of soup made with dried turnips and a chunk of smoked duck. You share the yurt with two other couriers, one fast asleep, the other chewing quietly on a sprig of mint. No one speaks for a while. Then the mint chewer says, "Heard someone swallowed a seal." You nod. "And they retrieved it?" You nod again. That's loyalty. You say nothing, but you think, no, that's the Yam. And in the morning, when you mount up again, there's no ceremony, no applause. Just another day, another message, another stretch of road stretching out into the hills. And still you ride. The next leg of your ride winds into lowlands soft with mist, the kind that hangs just above the grass like a breath that refuses to rise. Dew clings to your coat, beads on your reins, and makes the saddle slick under your thighs. But it's peaceful here, less urgency, more rhythm. The horse falls into a steady trot, hooves muffled by the damp earth. You shift your weight slightly and fall into sync with the land, the beast, and the message still resting in your satchel. It's a merchant's scroll, nothing fancy, just confirmation of salt delivery. But the station it's heading to is notable. It sits at the junction of three trade routes: grain from the south, wool from the east, and copper from the west. It's not a large outpost, but it hums with quiet significance. Messages that pass through here often go far. You pass a group of shepherds who give you a curious nod, the kind reserved for Yam couriers. Not quite respect, not quite suspicion. Something between reverence and wonder. They don't ask questions, and you don't offer answers. You simply ride past, like a shadow in broad daylight. You stop by a low hill where an old monument stands, just a pile of stones ringed by shards of bone and faded ribbons. A courier's grave. No marker, no name, just a place where a rider fell and was honored. You add a small stone to the pile, as all couriers do. It's tradition. No one speaks of these sites in the capital, but every Yam rider knows where they are. You ride on. The next station is a small wooden gear built up beside a grove of larch trees. The wind rustles the needles overhead, sounding like distant rain. The keeper here is an old man with a limp and a chewed-up hat. He takes your scroll, examines the seal, and places it reverently on a shelf lined with old, cracked bowls. "It'll head east tomorrow," he says. You sit on a low stool while he pours you warm mare's milk and a ladle of something thick and salty. Boiled rice with marrow and herbs. You eat slowly, letting your shoulders sink lower with each bite. The old man watches you for a time, then says, "You been riding the core routes?" You nod. He spits into the fire and says, "Used to be. They left the core to the fastest. Now they send the stubborn ones." You shrug. "Same difference." He chuckles. "Fair." After dinner, he brings out a stack of old message tags, scraps of bone, leather, and stamped wood, all marked with routes long retired. Some are cracked, a few still smell faintly of smoke. He tells you about a message that once crossed the empire in 6 days, passed through 11 riders, and arrived just hours before a city siege. The defenders evacuated. The enemy found empty homes and no resistance. "Message saved a city," he says. "Or maybe scared the enemy into thinking we were stronger than we were." He laughs. "Same thing." You sleep a few hours there, wrapped in wool, your saddlebag tucked under your head. When you rise, the sky is lavender and gray, and your new mount, a calm, dun-colored gelding, waits outside. The keeper hands you a bundle. It's nothing urgent. Just a letter from a teacher to his brother. South route. You raise an eyebrow. A teacher? He nods. From the monastery. Apparently his brother makes saddles. You take the letter. It's wrapped in cloth, sealed with wax, impressed by what looks like a lotus blossom. Likely just family news, maybe a request for a visit. Nothing to fret over, but it's a reminder that not all messages are about power, war, or trade. Some are just people reaching across distance. Historians still argue whether the yam was ever truly universal. Officially, it was for state business. Unofficially, it carried love letters, poetry, promises, and regrets. The infrastructure may have been imperial, but the contents? Human, through and through. You mount up again and head south. The land flattens out, dotted with grazing herds and squat homes painted in pale colors. You stop at a ridge to watch the sunrise, the sky splitting open with ribbons of pink and orange. It's breathtaking. And then you ride on, the teacher's letter secured in your bag, the wind tugging at your sleeves, and the trail unwinding ahead like it always has, one hoofbeat at a time. And still, you ride. By the time you pass through the southern pasture lands, the sun is high and the air smells faintly of clover and damp leather. Herds of goats dot the hillside, their bells jingling lazily as they shuffle through the grass. You give them a wide berth, not because they're a threat, but because nothing delays a courier quite like being stared down by a stubborn goat in the middle of a trail. Your new scroll is light, the one from the monastery teacher to his brother. It rides easily in your satchel, barely shifting with your movements. The horse beneath you is calm and sure-footed, the trail open and soft. For a moment, you allow yourself the illusion that this is just a ride for pleasure. But as you near the next station, that illusion breaks. You crest a ridge and see a group of riders already gathered. 3, maybe 4. They're not yam couriers. You can tell by the way they carry themselves, by the mismatched coats and the weapons slung a little too casually across their backs. Bandits. Possibly, or deserters. Either way, you slow your horse and watch from the cover of a thicket. One of them is holding something, a yam satchel, the kind used for secondary dispatches, the kind that doesn't belong to them. You stay hidden and weigh your options. You could turn back, reroute, and report, or you could try something riskier. You pull from your saddlebag a worn piece of parchment you've kept for just such occasions, an old decoy scroll with broken seals and no contents. You unwrap it, smear a bit of mud over the writing, and rewrap it with practiced hands. Then you nudge your horse forward, keeping your posture relaxed, your face passive. The men see you as you round the bend. One stands and raises a hand. You stop. "Rider," he calls. "Yam," you reply. "South Circuit." He eyes your horse, your satchel. "You got anything for the outpost?" "Just personal delivery. No seal," he smirks. "Mind if we take a look?" You don't respond. You simply toss him the decoy scroll. He catches it, opens it, and frowns. "This is just—" "Yep," you interrupt. "Just that." He tosses it back. "Not worth our time," he mutters. One of the others chuckles. You keep your horse walking slowly forward, heart pounding. Just past the group, one of them leans in. "Careful out here. Lots of bad types around." "I'll keep that in mind," you say. And then you're past. It isn't until you reach the next yurt station, an unassuming post near a watering hole, that you allow yourself to breathe fully. The keeper there, a grizzled woman with hair braided into a crown, greets you with a nod and a tin cup of sour milk. You dismount, hand over the real scroll, and explain, briefly, what happened. She sighs, spits into the dust, and says, "Third time this month." She adds a mark to her ledger, a red smear against the scroll root. They're probing, looking for weak spots. Historians still argue about whether organized attacks on the yam became common toward the empire's end. Some believe it was isolated, local bandits trying their luck. Others say it was a slow, quiet rebellion, a test of what happened when the legs of the empire started to shake. You eat bread with onion jam while your horse is resaddled. The sun climbs higher. It's a warm day. Quiet, too quiet. Before you go, the keeper hands you another message, a short one, just a strip of leather, rolled tight and tied with dyed wool. "Not urgent," she says, "but important." You nod. You don't need to ask what it says. You don't need to know who it's for. You mount up again, adjust your scarf, and tap your heels lightly. The road bends west now, toward the river towns. As you ride, you think not of threats or scrolls or sacred seals, but of the rhythm of hooves on soil, the rhythm of one station feeding the next. The rhythm of human need and trust, traveling faster than rumor. You are the middleman of empires, the steady pulse between command and response, between hope and outcome, and still you ride. The path west leads you down toward the river valleys, where the land opens again into wide floodplains striped with green and gold. The grass here is taller, softer, and the breeze carries the scent of wet earth and reeds. You can hear frogs long before you see them, deep, rhythmic croaks rising in waves from the banks. Somewhere to the north, cranes are calling, their sharp cries echoing through the wide open sky. It's in this kind of place where the yam hums its quietest tune. Not a thunder of hooves, not the clang of urgency, but the slow, reliable murmur of movement. This stretch of the road isn't particularly dangerous. There are few bandits here, and even fewer reasons for conflict. It's a place where things pass without ceremony. Grain shipments, birth announcements, forgotten love letters. You pull the small, wool-tied leather strip from your satchel. It's light, barely thicker than a coin, but the wool cord around it is dyed with the deep blue hue used only by temple scribes. A message from one spiritual post to another, likely a proverb, or a request for ceremonial supplies, or news of a teacher's passing. You're not meant to know. The first ferry outpost comes into view just as the river widens, glinting silver under the midday sun. A flat-bottomed barge is moored at the edge, tied between two willows. The operator, a round man with an oversized hat, squints at you and waves lazily. "You carrying the river tag?" he calls. You nod and show the wrapped leather piece. He nods back. "Then I guess you're not walking." The Mongol postal system made liberal use of water routes when terrain allowed. Rivers were natural highways, safer and easier on horses. In places like this, ferryboats were part of the network. Not flashy, not fast, but functional. Even the smallest stream was charted, mapped by feel and passed down rider to rider. There are still no formal maps, no signage, only trust and tradition. You guide your horse onto the barge, which groans under the shift in weight. The ferryman unties the ropes and uses a long pole to push you into the current. The water ripples and churns around you. Birds swirl overhead, and for a little while, you don't ride, you float. He glances over at you after a while and says, "Ever carry one of the Khan's letters?" You shake your head. "I did," he says, with a note of pride. "Long time ago. Before the Falcons." He doesn't explain further. Historians still debate the existence of the so-called Khan scrolls, special orders supposedly written on silver-threaded bark and delivered in sealed iron cases. No verified examples remain. Some think they're myth, others believe they were real but reused, their contents erased to preserve secrecy. Either way, the man's face glows as he speaks of it. The barge drifts to the other bank and scrapes gently against the pebbled shore. You guide your horse back onto solid land, thank the ferryman with a nod, and ride up a narrow dirt path between two reeds. The road here forks, one trail to the monastery outpost, one to a town where trade is heavy this time of year. You choose the right-hand fork, where the path is quieter, and ride past rows of millet fields rippling in the breeze. A woman waves from a doorway. A child chases a chicken. You wave back, almost unconsciously. A mile later, you reach a modest station. 2 yurts, a corral, and a small shrine with a carved wooden post shaped like a bird. You dismount, hand over the blue-wrapped scroll, and let your horse drink deeply from a stone basin filled with cool water. The station keeper is young, barely more than a teenager. He glances at the scroll and nods in recognition. Monastery's expecting this. Then he offers you something rare, a scrap of poetry. He pulls it from a pouch, unfolds it with care, and recites. A message rides faster than thunder, but softer than silk in the hand. Its rider is no one, but still he arrives. You blink. Who wrote that? He shrugs. It was here when I got here. You smile, fold it, tuck it into your coat. Moments like this aren't written down in the official histories. They don't make it into the scrolls or the maps or the dusty chronicles penned by men who've never seen the inside of a saddle, but they're real. They're the breath of the yam, and so, after a brief rest, you ride again. Another scroll. Another rider, another road fading into the dusk, and still you ride. The light is soft now, the golden hour stretching across the steppe with long shadows and that hazy magic that makes even the dust seem poetic. You've passed the last outpost before the hills and you're climbing again, slowly, steadily, into higher country. The road narrows, bends more often, and the wind tugs harder at your coat. Your new scroll is tucked safe and quiet in your satchel, a dispatch from a provincial overseer to a supply master. Inventory tallies, most likely. But it carries the seal of the Kagan's administrative wing, so it moves with priority, even if the contents are as thrilling as a ledger. You lean forward in the saddle, not out of urgency, but out of respect. The trail deserves it. This is one of the older sections of the Yam, a route that predates Genghis himself, worn by centuries of migration, trade, and movement. Every step feels rehearsed, like a dance passed down by memory. The terrain grows rocky. Pines start to appear, tall and twisted by wind. Birds caw from the branches. You pass an old cairn, built in layers like a wedding cake, with blue prayer scarves draped from its peak. Someone's added a new offering, yak butter, in a tiny copper bowl. You add a pebble and bow your head for a moment, not because you're particularly spiritual, but because out here it's rude not to say hello to the road. There's a sharp turn, then a narrow pass cut into the cliff face. Your horse hesitates, snorts. You whisper to her. She listens. You move on, then movement ahead. Just a glimmer, just a flicker, and then another rider appears. Coming fast, you pull your horse to the side as he thunders past, nodding once, his satchel flapping. No words. Just the flash of a red tag, urgent. You watch him disappear into the trees. A few heartbeats later, a second rider follows. Same pace, same urgency. Something's happening, but not on your route. You carry on. At the summit of the pass, you dismount to rest your horse and take in the view. The land unfurls beneath you like a scroll, valleys dotted with gyrs, distant ridgelines painted with gold. The wind sings through the rocks. There's a small wooden bench here, improbably placed, probably built by some poetic courier with too much time and a bent nail. You sit, sip water, and think. The Yam, in all its complexity, is also staggeringly simple. Take something from one place, deliver it to another, and don't ask questions. And yet, that simplicity hides a deep intelligence. The Mongols didn't just conquer land, they conquered time. While other empires sent riders into the unknown, hoping for arrival, the Mongols built a living, breathing machine that knew. And every time you sit on a bench like this, staring at the vastness below, you realize you are a moving nerve. Part of a brain that stretches across mountains and rivers. You don't just carry information, you are information. You stand, stretch, mount again. The road down is steeper, winding. You pass a herd of wild sheep grazing near the edge of the trail. One watches you with the judgmental calm only sheep can summon. You nod respectfully and move on. Below, the next station comes into view. A riverside outpost with 3 yurts, a wooden watchtower, and smoke curling from 2 chimneys. Children run between tethered horses, laughing. A dog barks. It feels safe. You hand off the scroll to a clerk with ink-stained sleeves. He checks the seal, nods, and slides it into a clay tube stamped with today's route code. No ceremony, just another message, received. You sleep that night beneath the stars, not in the yurt, but on a woolen mat under a sloping awning. The air is brisk, the stars seem closer. And in your dreams, you're still riding, across snow, across sand, across centuries. Because when the yam runs through your blood, it never stops, and still you ride. Morning comes slow and gray, the sky cloaked in cloud, and the earth soft with dew. You rise before most of the station stirs, your limbs stiff, but your mind sharp, trained now to the rhythm of movement, the sense of duty humming just beneath your skin. There's one last leg to ride today, not far, but important. The final delivery of your current circuit, a ceremonial notice from a regional steward to a clan leader in the foothills. It's not urgent, not secret, but it carries the kind of weight that lies between formality and respect. The yam handles both with equal seriousness. Your horse for the day is a calm-eyed stallion with the kind of posture that says, "Let's get on with it." You oblige. The trail winds beside a river swollen by recent rains. The banks are slick, the air thick with the scent of moss and last night's campfire. The trees lean low in places, and you duck more often than usual. There's no rush. This is the kind of ride where the act of delivery matters just as much as the contents. You think about that a lot these days, not just where the messages go, but what they mean in the spaces between. How many decisions hinge on a piece of tied paper? How many reunions, feasts, funerals, treaties, and apologies rely on someone like you crossing this exact patch of earth at the right moment? Historians often write about the Mongol Empire in sweeping strokes, borders drawn in fire, cities razed or spared, khans crowned and deposed. But few speak about the small, daily graces, the letter that arrives before snow blocks the pass, the request for flour answered before a famine, the apology received before a war. You carry that weight lightly, but you carry it. Around midday, you crest the last hill and see the foothills spread before you, rolling, wooded, stitched with winding paths and dotted with stone towers. You guide your horse down a narrow track into a small clearing where the clan's outpost waits. It's not a fortified station, more a communal home with a long wooden porch and smoke curling from chimneys. A banner flutters in the breeze, its faded symbol half torn but still proud. An elder stands waiting. He wears a coat of layered wool and carries no weapon, only a staff carved with animal totems. His eyes are sharp. As you dismount, he steps forward and accepts the scroll with both hands. No words are exchanged. You bow slightly. He returns it, and that's it. No fanfare. No celebration, just another message in the web of empire, arriving exactly as intended. You stay long enough to eat a simple meal of root stew and flatbread cooked over a stone griddle. The elders speak quietly among themselves, nodding toward you every so often, but not intruding. You sit beneath a plum tree and let your body settle, not rest. Just stillness. When the time comes, you decline the offer to stay overnight. There's one more thing you must do before you finish this ride. You backtrack slightly, then turn off the main trail toward a place you remember from an earlier route, a narrow hilltop marked by 3 stones in a triangle. At the center is a box buried in the soil, hidden under a layer of turf. You uncover it gently and place inside a copy of your route log, burned onto thin strips of bark. It's tradition here at the edge of the circuit. When you complete a full loop without losing a message, you leave your mark, not to boast. Not for reward, just to say, this route holds. You bury the box again, cover it with earth and moss, and stand for a moment in the wind. Your horse snorts gently. You mount. And now the yam begins again, because it always begins again. One scroll delivered, another waiting. One rider rests, another rises. From the highest peak to the lowest riverbed it moves. From Karakoram to the distant fringes of desert it moves. And always, at the center of it all, a rider, you. And still you ride. Now the horses are quiet. The fire is low. You're no longer galloping across ridges or scanning distant smoke signals. You're still, wrapped in wool, the scent of pine smoke curling softly through the night. Your body, which has carried you across so many miles, begins to loosen, to unfold. Your fingers, still remembering reins, now rest gently on the blanket. The wind outside is gentle, brushing the yurt like a lullaby. You think of all the messages you've carried, not just the ones sealed in wax, but the silent ones. The look between a station keeper and her son, the bowl of soup handed without a word, the touch of a warm cloth passed from an elder's hand. These are messages too, unwritten, undelivered except through presence. Somewhere, another rider has taken your place, another scroll moves forward. The road, as always, continues without end. But for now, for tonight, you rest. The yam hums on without you, a gentle heartbeat across an empire once held together by hooves and hope. You've done your part. And as your eyes drift closed, you hear it faintly, the sound of hooves, far off, rhythmic, steady. The sound of something continuing, the sound of something returning. And still, you ride, sweet dreams.